The rifle shot echoed across the dusty main street of Ash Fork, Arizona, followed by the sickening thud of Vivian Larson's father collapsing beside her. Her world shattered in that moment, just like the display window of their general store as bullets continued to fly. It was 1876, and at 24 years old, Vivian had already endured more heartbreak than most people faced in a lifetime. "Pa!" she screamed, dropping to her knees beside him as the gang of outlaws galloped away, their saddlebags heavy with the store's earnings. The blood spread across her father's chest in a crimson stain that told her everything she needed to know. Richard Larson had been the last person on earth who truly loved her. Now, he was gone too. The next weeks passed in a blur of grief. The townsfolk helped bury her father beside her mother, who had succumbed to fever 3 years prior. Her brother Thomas had been killed in a mining accident the previous year. At the graveside, Sheriff Wilson awkwardly patted her shoulder. "Miss Larson, you ought to consider selling the store and heading back east to family," he suggested, his weathered face creased with concern. "A woman alone out here. It ain't proper nor safe." "I have no family left, Sheriff," Vivian replied, her voice hollow, "and this store is all I have." The townspeople nodded solemnly, but their eyes held pity and something worse. Speculation. Every unmarried man in Ash Fork suddenly found reasons to visit the general store. Some brought condolences, others brought marriage proposals thinly disguised as offers of protection. The widow Garrett even brought her son Harold, a sweaty-palmed man with thinning hair who stared at Vivian's chest while talking about combining their business interests. By the time October's chills swept through the territory, Vivian had made her decision. She would run her father's store herself, alone if necessary. The bank had tried to foreclose, claiming a woman couldn't possibly manage such an enterprise, but Judge Potter, who'd been fond of her father, had intervened. She had 6 months to prove the business profitable or lose everything. That night, as she locked the store's doors, Vivian stared at her reflection in the window. The moonlight illuminated a face once described as pretty, with large eyes the color of summer sage and honey blonde hair pulled into a practical bun. But grief had hollowed her cheeks and hardened something behind her eyes. "I don't need anyone," she whispered to herself. "Love is just another way to get hurt." The bell above the door jingled early the next morning. Vivian looked up from her inventory ledger to see a stranger tall, broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable bearing of a man accustomed to long days in the saddle. His face was partially shadowed by his hat brim, but she could see a strong jawline darkened with stubble. His clothes were trail-worn but clean. "Good morning," she said formally. "How can I help you?" The man removed his hat, revealing tousled dark brown hair and eyes the color of whiskey. "Madam," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Name's Knox Fitzgerald, looking for supplies, new in town." Vivian noticed his hands calloused and strong, but they moved with unexpected gentleness as he examined a bolt of fabric. Not the rough handling she'd come to expect from most cowboys passing through. "What brings you to Ash Fork, Mr. Fitzgerald?" she asked, more out of business necessity than curiosity. Knowing who came through town was important for inventory planning. "Cattle," he answered simply. "Hired on with the Diamondback Ranch. Mr. Hollister's expanding his operation." Vivian nodded. Samuel Hollister owned the largest spread outside town. "Well, we carry most essentials. What did you need today?" As she helped him gather supplies: coffee, sugar, tobacco, ammunition for his Winchester, and a new shirt. She noticed how he didn't rush or crowd her space. Most men who came into the store either treated her like a child who needed direction or hovered too close, finding excuses to brush against her. Knox Fitzgerald did neither. He maintained a respectful distance, spoke clearly but sparingly, and when their fingers accidentally touched as she handed him his change, he quickly withdrew his hand with a muttered, "Pardon me, madam." After he left, Vivian found herself replaying their brief interaction. There was something reassuringly solid about him, but she quickly dismissed the thought. Men were either predators or problems in her experience, and she had a store to run. Over the following weeks, Knox became a regular visitor to the store, usually arriving early Saturday mornings when the shop was quietest. He never lingered unnecessarily, but neither did he rush. Each visit, he'd purchase a few supplies, exchange brief pleasantries, and be on his way. Unlike other ranch hands who blew their wages on whiskey and women at the saloons, he seemed to save his money, making small, practical purchases. One rainy Tuesday in November, the door burst open just before closing time. Knox stumbled in, supporting a young boy of perhaps 12 or 13. Blood soaked the child's left pant leg. "Miss Larson," Knox said urgently, "the boy's horse threw him near your store. His legs caught on a nail coming loose from your porch. Need someplace dry to patch him up." "Bring him back here," Vivian directed, quickly clearing space behind the counter. Her heart raced, but years of helping her father had taught her to stay calm in emergencies. "There's clean water in that pitcher. I'll get bandages." As Knox settled the boy on a chair, Vivian gathered supplies: clean cloths, her mother's sewing kit, and the bottle of whiskey her father had kept for medicinal purposes. The boy's face was pale beneath his freckles, his eyes wide with pain and fear. "What's your name?" she asked gently, cutting away the torn trouser leg. "Jamie," he whispered. "Jamie Collins. My pa works at the livery." "You're going to be just fine, Jamie," she assured him, examining the wound. "It's deep but clean. Mr. Fitzgerald, could you hold the lamp closer?" Knox positioned the lamp while Vivian cleaned and stitched the wound with steady hands. The boy whimpered but didn't cry out. Knox spoke to him in a low, calming voice, telling him a story about a horse he'd once owned that could supposedly count to 10 by pawing the ground. The absurd tale made Jamie smile despite his pain, and Vivian found herself smiling too when she finished. Knox insisted on carrying Jamie home to his worried father. "I'll be back to clean up," he promised. By the time he returned, Vivian had already mopped up the blood and put away the supplies. Rain still pounded against the windows. "Boy's father says thank you," Knox said, removing his dripping hat. Water ran in rivulets from his coat onto the floor. "Says he'll be by tomorrow to pay for the bandages and your trouble." "There's no need," Vivian replied. "I'm glad I could help." They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Knox cleared his throat. "That was fine work with those stitches. Most women would have fainted at the sight." Vivian felt a flicker of irritation. "Most women are stronger than men give them credit for, Mr. Fitzgerald." To her surprise, he nodded. "That's the truth. My mother ran our farm in Kansas for 3 years after my father died in the war before she remarried. Toughest person I've ever known." Something in his voice, a note of genuine respect, softened her annoyance. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman," she said, moving behind the counter. "You should get dry before you catch your death." Knox nodded but hesitated. "Miss Larson, there's a matter I've been meaning to discuss with you. The ranch hands mentioned that you've been having trouble with the Garrett boy coming around, making unwanted advances." Vivian stiffened. "That's not something you need concern yourself with." "Maybe not," he acknowledged. "But Harold Garrett's got a mean streak when drinking, and he's been boasting at the saloon that he'll have you and the store before winter's end. Said some things no decent man should say about a lady." "And what exactly do you propose I do about that, Mr. Fitzgerald?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. "I can't control what gossips say." "No, but you might consider keeping that shotgun under the counter loaded," he said simply. "And know that if you need assistance, Hollister Ranch is just 4 miles west. Any of us would come if called." The offer was made so matter-of-factly, without any hint of condescension, that Vivian found herself momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she finally said, "but I've been managing on my own." Knox studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good night, Miss Larson." He settled his still damp hat on his head and stepped back into the rain. Vivian watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, a dark silhouette dissolving into the stormy night. Only after he disappeared did she realize her hands were trembling slightly. The following week brought the first significant snowfall of the season, blanketing Ash Fork in white. Business slowed as people stayed home, but Vivian kept regular hours. The store was her livelihood and her purpose. Every morning she rose before dawn, kindled the stove to warm the store, and prepared for the day's trade. On Thursday morning, she swept the snow from the boardwalk in front of the store, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The main street was mostly deserted, save for a few determined souls hurrying about their business. "Well now, ain't you a pretty sight, Miss Vivian?" She turned to find Harold Garrett leaning against the hitching post, his eyes bloodshot. Even from several feet away she could smell the whiskey on him. "Good morning, Mr. Garrett," she replied coolly. "The store isn't open yet." He pushed away from the post and took an unsteady step toward her. "Don't need the store. Need to talk to you about our future." "There is no our future, Mr. Garrett," Vivian said firmly, tightening her grip on the broom. "I've told you that before." Harold's face darkened. "Playing hard to get, huh? Everyone knows you need a man to keep that store running. Folks are already betting on when you'll fail." "Then they'll lose their money," she replied, turning to go back inside. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "Don't you walk away from me. My mother says we'd make a fine match, and my mother's always right." Vivian tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me immediately." "Or what?" he sneered, pulling her closer. "You gonna sweep me to death?" "She won't need to." The deep voice came from behind Harold. Knox Fitzgerald stood there, leading his horse, his expression calm but his eyes hard as flint. "This ain't your business, Cowboy," Harold spat, though his grip on Vivian's arm loosened slightly. "Miss Larson asked you to let go," Knox said, his voice deceptively mild. "That makes it my business." Harold released Vivian's arm but turned to face Knox, his hand hovering near the pistol at his hip. "You're that new hand at Hollister's. Think you're something special, don't you? Coming to town all quiet-like, watching everyone." Knox remained motionless, one hand resting casually on his saddle horn. "Just passing through, Garrett. Heading to the store same as everyone else." "Well, pass on through then," Harold snarled. "Miss Vivian and I were having a private conversation." "Actually," Vivian interjected, rubbing her arm where red marks were already forming, "we were finished talking. Good day, Mr. Garrett." She walked to the store entrance, unlocked the door, and held it open. "Mr. Fitzgerald, if you'd like to come in, the store is now open." For a moment, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Then Harold spat into the snow. "You'll change your tune soon enough, Miss Vivian. Bank won't wait forever." He shot a venomous look at Knox before stalking away toward the saloon. Inside the store, Vivian's composure finally cracked. Her hands shook as she tried to light the lamp, the match breaking between her fingers. "Allow me," Knox said quietly, taking the matches. He lit the lamp with a steady hand, then stepped back, giving her space. "Thank you," she managed, taking a deep breath. "For outside and for this." Knox nodded. "Garrett's a bully. Always has been, according to the other hands." He paused. "Is what he said true?" About the bank, Vivian hesitated, then decided there was no point in denying what the whole town probably knew. I have until April to prove the store can be profitable under my management. Otherwise, they'll foreclose. And Garrett's offering marriage as a solution. He's offering to take the store off my hands and make me his wife in that order of importance, she said bitterly. His mother owns half the vacant properties in town. They've been trying to get this location for years. Knox removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign he was thinking deeply. Miss Larson, I don't mean to overstep, but if business is slow, have you considered expanding your inventory? Or offering delivery to the outlying ranches? Vivian blinked in surprise. Delivery? I couldn't possibly, why not? Hollister's hands ride into town once a week for supplies. Same with the Circle T and Lazy K ranches. But the smaller homesteads often go without because they can't spare someone for a day's ride to town. You could take orders, prepare packages, and hire someone to deliver them. I couldn't afford to hire anyone, she admitted. Start small, he suggested. Once a month, perhaps. Charge a small fee for the service. Word would spread. He glanced around the store. And you might consider stocking more ranching supplies. Hollister's men have to ride all the way to Prescott for certain items. Vivian felt a spark of interest despite herself. Like what? Specialized tack, better quality lariats, branding irons. Knox began listing items, and soon they were deep in conversation about the needs of local ranches and how the store might meet them. By the time he left an hour later, Vivian had filled several pages of her ledger with notes and ideas. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a glimmer of hope about the store's future. That night, she lay awake thinking about Knox Fitzgerald. He'd offered help without making her feel helpless, a distinction few men seemed to understand. There was something different about him, something that made her both curious and cautious. As December progressed, Vivian implemented Knox's suggestions. She sent letters to ranches within a 20-mile radius, offering monthly delivery service for a small fee. The response was better than she dared hope. She also ordered some of the specialized items Knox had mentioned, using almost the last of her savings. When the first shipment arrived, Knox happened to be in the store. He examined the new merchandise with obvious approval. "These are fine quality," he commented, testing the weight of a lariat. "Better than what we've been using." "I ordered them on your recommendation," she admitted. "I hope they sell." "They will," he assured her. "Hollister's been complaining about the poor quality ropes we've been using. I'll mention you've got better ones in stock." True to his word, within days, several ranch hands came specifically asking for the new supplies. By Christmas, Vivian had sold out of her initial order and placed a larger one. The delivery service was also proving successful, with more ranches requesting to be added to the route. The only problem was finding someone reliable to make the deliveries. She tried hiring the blacksmith's son, but he'd proven careless with the goods. The stagecoach driver had offered to take packages along his route, but he couldn't reach the more remote ranches. On a snowy afternoon just before Christmas, Knox came into the store with an unexpected proposal. "I've spoken to Mr. Hollister," he said without preamble. "He's agreed to let me make deliveries for you on my days off. I know the territory better than most, and I've got a sturdy pack horse." Vivian looked up from the ledger she was updating. "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering," he replied. "For a fair wage, of course. 10% of the delivery fees," she frowned. "That's not nearly enough for a full day's work." "It's fair," he insisted. "I'd be riding anyway on my day off. Might as well make it useful." Vivian studied him, trying to discern his motives. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Fitzgerald?" For the first time since she'd met him, Knox looked slightly uncomfortable. "I respect what you're trying to do here," he finally said. Running a business alone isn't easy, especially in a town that doesn't believe you can succeed. There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience with such doubts, but before she could question him further, the door opened, bringing in Mrs. Peterson and her 4 children looking for candy sticks. By the time the Petersons left, Knox had melted away too, leaving only a note on the counter. First delivery run this Saturday, if agreeable. KF. The arrangement proved more successful than Vivian had anticipated. Knox was efficient and thorough, returning with new orders and occasionally with produce or handcrafted items from outlying farms that he suggested she might sell in the store. By February, the general store's profits had increased noticeably. Vivian began to believe she might actually meet the bank's requirements by April. Even more surprising was how she found herself looking forward to Knox's visits. He never stayed long, never presumed, but their brief conversations had become a bright spot in her otherwise solitary existence. One evening in late February, as she was closing up, Sheriff Wilson arrived with troubling news. "Miss Larson, I thought you should know the gang that killed your father has been spotted near Jerome. They might be heading this way." Vivian's hands froze on the ledger she'd been about to put away. "How many are there?" "4 or 5 from the reports," the sheriff said grimly. "Led by a man called Rollins. They've hit 2 general stores and a bank in the last month." "What should I do?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "Don't keep much cash on hand." "I'll have deputies watching the town, but—" He hesitated. "Might be best if you didn't stay alone in the store at night, at least until we're sure they've moved on." After he left, Vivian sat in the darkening store, memories of her father's death flooding back. She'd managed to push those images aside most days, but now they returned in vivid detail: the sudden gunfire, the look of surprise on her father's face as he fell, the pool of blood spreading across the wooden floor. A knock at the back door startled her from these dark thoughts. Hands shaking, she picked up the shotgun before approaching. "Who's there?" she called. "It's Knox, Miss Larson." Relief washed over her as she unbolted the door. Knox stood there, his expression concerned. "Sheriff just told me about the Rollins gang," he said without preamble. "I came to make sure you were all right." The simple kindness in those words nearly undid her composure. "I'm fine," she managed. "Just closing up." Knox's eyes took in the shotgun still clutched in her hands, but he made no comment about it. "If you'd permit me, I'd like to check the locks on your doors and windows. That back door latch looked weak when I delivered supplies last week." Vivian hesitated only briefly before nodding. As Knox moved methodically through the store, testing windows and examining door frames, she found his presence oddly comforting. "The upstairs window on the east side needs securing," he reported. "And this back door could use a stronger bolt. I can fix both tomorrow if you'd allow it." "Thank you," she said quietly, "but I'm sure Mr. Hollister needs you at the ranch." "I'm off tomorrow," he replied. "And Mr. Hollister understands the situation. In fact—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "In fact, he suggested you might consider staying at the ranch until this danger passes. His wife would welcome the company, and there are plenty of hands to keep watch." The offer was tempting, but Vivian shook her head. "I can't abandon the store. If those men come back to Ash Fork, they'll rob it whether I'm here or not. At least if I'm present, I might save something." Knox frowned. "Your father's goods aren't worth your life, Miss Larson." "It's not about the goods," she said, a sudden fierceness in her voice. "This store is all I have left of my family. I won't be driven from it by fear." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand. In that case, I'll be back first thing tomorrow with tools and lumber to secure this place properly." True to his word, Knox arrived early the next morning. Throughout the day, between serving customers, Vivian watched as he methodically reinforced doors, repaired window latches, and even constructed a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard where she could conceal the day's earnings. By late afternoon, the store was more secure than it had been since her father built it. Knox refused payment for his work, accepting only a hot meal that Vivian prepared on the small stove in her living quarters above the store. As they ate the simple fare of beans, cornbread, and coffee, Vivian found herself more relaxed in his company than she'd been with anyone in a long time. "You never speak of your life before Ash Fork," she observed as they finished the meal. "Have you always been a ranch hand?" Knox's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "No, madam. I was a lawman for a time in Kansas." This unexpected revelation surprised her. "What made you leave that profession?" He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I failed to protect someone I should have. Decided I wasn't cut out for wearing a badge after that." The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Vivian recognized it as the same kind of grief she carried herself, the regret of not being able to save a loved one. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Knox nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without inviting further questions. "It was a long time ago." They finished the meal in companionable silence. As Knox prepared to leave, Vivian found herself reluctant to see him go. The store would feel emptier without his steady presence. At the door, he turned to her. "I'd feel better if someone stayed with you until this gang is caught." "The sheriff has deputies watching the street," she reminded him. "The same deputies who were watching when your father was killed," he said bluntly. The words stung, but she couldn't deny their truth. Still, her independence was hard-won. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Fitzgerald, but I'll manage." Knox looked as if he wanted to argue further, but instead nodded respectfully. "At least keep that shotgun loaded and close at hand." After he left, Vivian double-checked all the new locks and bolts he'd installed, grateful for the added security. That night, she slept with the shotgun beside her bed, waking at every creak and settling of the old building. For the next week, Knox made a point of stopping by the store at closing time each evening and again at opening. He never stayed long, but his brief visits reassured her. Other townspeople also made more frequent appearances, ostensibly to shop, but clearly checking on her welfare. Even the banker, Mr. Peterson, came by to inquire about her safety. "You've made quite an impression on the town, Miss Larson," he commented, looking around the increasingly well-stocked store. "I must admit, I had my doubts about a young woman running this business alone, but your father would be proud of what you've accomplished." Coming from the man who had initially been so skeptical of her abilities, the compliment meant a great deal. "Does this mean the bank will extend my probationary period?" she asked hopefully. Mr. Peterson smiled. "Based on your recent ledgers, I don't think that will be necessary. If you continue as you have been, you'll meet our requirements handily." The good news buoyed her spirits for the rest of the day. When Knox arrived that evening, she eagerly shared the banker's assessment. "That's fine news," he said, his normally reserved expression warming with a genuine smile. "You've earned it. Not many could have done what you have under such circumstances." His praise meant more to her than the banker's, though she couldn't quite explain why. Perhaps because Knox had seen her struggles up close, had offered help without making her feel indebted. "I couldn't have done it without your suggestions," she admitted. "The delivery service has made all the difference." "You would have thought of it eventually," he said with characteristic modesty. "You've got a good mind for business." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, the February dusk was settling over Ash Fork, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. "It's a fine evening," Knox observed. "Almost feels like spring might be coming." Vivian nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. She could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that always seemed to accompany him. "Yes, it does." His eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a current of awareness that had been building gradually over weeks of brief encounters and quiet conversations. Knox cleared his throat and stepped back slightly. "I should let you close up. Early start tomorrow." "Of course," she said, an unfamiliar disappointment settling in her chest as he turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Miss Larson, Vivian." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "There's a church social on Sunday after services. I wondered if you might consider attending. With me." The invitation caught her completely off guard. In all their interactions, Knox had never shown any indication that he saw her as anything more than a shopkeeper he was helping. As an escort, she asked carefully. "As my companion for the afternoon," he clarified, his usual confidence seemingly diminished. "If you'd be willing." Vivian considered his request. She'd avoided social gatherings since her father's death, finding the pitying glances and whispered comments about poor Miss Larson unbearable. But the thought of attending with Knox was somehow different. "I would like that," she said softly. The smile that transformed his usually serious face made her heart skip a beat. "I'll call for you after services, then." After he left, Vivian found herself standing at the window long after his figure had disappeared down the darkening street. She felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years: anticipation, perhaps, or hope. The feeling didn't last long. The very next morning, just after opening, Harold Garrett stormed into the store, his face flushed with anger. "So it's true," he spat, slamming his fist on the counter. "You're stepping out with that cowboy from Hollister's." Vivian maintained her composure with effort. "My personal affairs are none of your concern, Mr. Garrett." "The hell they aren't," he snarled. "Everyone knows I've been courting you." "Now you're making me look like a fool, taking up with some drifter." "You were never courting me," she corrected him firmly. "I made that clear from the start, and Mr. Fitzgerald is not a drifter. He's a respected employee at the Diamondback Ranch." Harold's face darkened further. "He's nothing but a saddle tramp with a mysterious past. Did you know he was run out of Kansas after killing a man? That's what they're saying at the saloon." Vivian's heart sank at this new information, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't listen to saloon gossip, Mr. Garrett. And I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my store unless you intend to make a purchase." He leaned closer, his breath sour with stale whiskey. "You'll regret choosing him over me, Vivian. Mark my words." After he stormed out, Vivian tried to dismiss his claims about Knox as jealous lies. But a seed of doubt had been planted. Knox had admitted to being a lawman in Kansas and to leaving after failing to protect someone. Had there been more to the story than he'd revealed, she didn't see Knox that day or the next, which was unusual. On Saturday, when he normally would have made his delivery rounds, another ranch hand arrived instead. "Knox asked me to handle the deliveries today, Miss Larson," the young cowboy explained. "He's been sent to check fence lines on the north property." Disappointment and confusion warred within her. Had he changed his mind about the social? Had Harold spread rumors that made Knox reconsider his association with her? By Sunday morning, Vivian had resolved to attend church and the social regardless, even if Knox didn't appear. She would not let town gossips or Harold Garrett dictate her actions. She wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that her mother had always said brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged her hair more carefully than usual. The sermon that morning seemed interminable, and she was acutely aware of the glances cast in her direction. Mrs. Garrett's disapproving sniff was particularly audible from 2 pews behind. There was no sign of Knox. As the congregation filed out into the bright March sunshine, Vivian steeled herself for the awkwardness of attending the social alone. She was halfway down the church steps when she spotted him. Knox stood beside his horse at the edge of the churchyard, dressed in clean clothes, not Sunday best exactly, but clearly his finest. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair, and when he caught sight of her, his face lit up in a way that made her previous doubts seem foolish. She made her way toward him, ignoring the whispers that followed. "I was afraid you weren't coming," she admitted when she reached him. "Had to ride the north fence line all day yesterday," he explained. "Didn't get back to the ranch until after midnight." He hesitated. "You look beautiful, Vivian." The simple compliment, delivered with such evident sincerity, warmed her more than the spring sunshine. "Thank you. You look rather handsome yourself." A hint of color touched his cheeks, and she realized with surprise that beneath his composed exterior, Knox was nervous. The discovery made him suddenly more human, more approachable. The social was held on the grounds behind the church, where tables had been set up laden with food brought by the congregation. Knox was quiet as they filled their plates, clearly uncomfortable with the curious stares and whispers that followed them. They found seats at the edge of the gathering, beneath a cottonwood tree just beginning to leaf out. For a few minutes they ate in silence. Vivian could sense Knox's tension and decided a direct approach might be best. "Harold Garrett came to the store Friday morning," she said quietly. "He was upset about our attending this social together." Knox nodded grimly. "I'm not surprised. He confronted me at the ranch yesterday too, made some threats." Vivian set down her fork, alarmed. "What kind of threats?" "Nothing worth repeating," Knox said dismissively. "Men like Garrett are all talk." She hesitated, then decided to voice the question that had been troubling her. "He also said something about your past in Kansas, about you killing someone." Knox went very still, his expression carefully blank. After a long moment, he set his plate aside and turned to face her directly. "I need to know if that matters to you," he said, his voice low and serious. "Because if it does, I should take you home now before this goes any further." The directness of his response surprised her. "I don't know what this is," she countered softly. "We've barely spoken outside the store." "You know what I mean, Vivian," he said, and the way he said her name made her heart beat faster. "There's something between us. Has been almost from the start, though I fought against it." She couldn't deny the truth of his words. "Why did you fight it?" "Because I didn't come to Ash Fork looking for entanglements," he admitted. "And because you deserve better than a man with my past." "Why don't you let me decide that?" she challenged gently. "Tell me what happened in Kansas." Knox was silent for so long that Vivian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but filled with an old pain. "I was deputy sheriff in a small town called Willow Creek. There was a woman, Sarah. We were to be married." He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "A gang came through town, led by a man named Rollins." Vivian's breath caught. "Rollins? The same man?" Knox nodded grimly. "The same man who killed your father. He robbed the bank in Willow Creek. I was escorting a prisoner to the county seat when it happened. The sheriff was killed. So was Sarah when she tried to stop them from taking her father's horses from the livery." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "That's why you came to Ash Fork. You're hunting Rollins." "I tracked him for 2 years," Knox confirmed. "Lost his trail in Colorado, then heard about the robbery here. By the time I arrived, he was long gone, but I found work at Hollister's, figuring Rollins might return." "And the man you killed," she pressed gently. "One of Rollins' gang. I caught up to him in Dodge City. He drew on me." Knox's expression hardened. "I was faster." Vivian absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the vengeful manhunter he described with the patient, gentle man she'd come to know. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "At first, because it wasn't your concern," he said honestly. "Later, because I was afraid of what you'd think. And because—" he hesitated. "Because the more time I spent with you, the less important revenge seemed. I began to wonder if there might be a future beyond my hunt for Rawlins." The admission clearly cost him something. Vivian reached out and tentatively placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry about Sarah, and I understand wanting justice for someone you loved." Knox turned his hand to clasp hers, his grip warm and strong. "It was justice at first," he acknowledged. "But somewhere along the way it became about vengeance. That's not a path that leads anywhere good." They sat in silence for a moment, hands still joined, each lost in thought. Around them, the social continued, but they might as well have been alone for all the attention they paid to it. Finally, Knox spoke again. "I need you to know that I care for you, Vivian, more than I thought possible after Sarah, but my past is complicated and Rawlins is still out there." "Life is always complicated," she replied. "My father used to say that happiness isn't the absence of problems, but having the right person beside you when they come." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she agreed, "and he would have liked you, I think." Before Knox could respond, a commotion near the church drew their attention. Sheriff Wilson was hurrying toward the gathering, his expression grave. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, silencing the cheerful conversations. "I need everyone to return to their homes immediately. We've received word that the Rawlins gang was spotted less than 10 miles from town." A murmur of alarm spread through the crowd. Knox was on his feet instantly, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Vivian," he said urgently, "I need to get you back to the store." "My shotgun is there," she agreed, gathering her skirts as she stood. Knox helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. As they rode toward the store, Vivian was acutely aware of his arms around her, of the solid strength of his chest against her back. Despite the danger approaching, she felt strangely protected. At the store, Knox insisted on checking all the entrances and exits before he was satisfied. "Bar the doors after I leave," he instructed. "Stay away from the windows. If they come, hide in that compartment we built and don't come out until you hear my voice or the sheriff's." "Where are you going?" she asked, suddenly afraid for him. "To help the sheriff organize the defense," he replied, checking his revolver. "We'll post men at all the town entrances." Vivian caught his arm. "Knox, don't do anything reckless. Rawlins has already taken too much from both of us." His expression softened as he looked down at her. Without warning, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a brief, fierce meeting of lips that left her breathless. "I'll come back," he promised when they parted. "Wait for me." After he left, Vivian secured the store as instructed, then went upstairs to change into more practical clothing. Her father's old shotgun was loaded and ready, and she positioned herself near the front window where she could see the main street while remaining hidden behind the curtain. Hours passed with no sign of trouble. The street remained deserted as dusk fell, most residents having heeded the sheriff's warning to stay indoors. Occasionally, Vivian glimpsed deputies making their rounds, but there was no sign of Knox. It was nearly midnight when she heard the distant sound of gunfire from the south end of town. Heart pounding, she moved away from the window as instructed, positioning herself behind the counter with the shotgun. More shots rang out, closer now, followed by shouts and the thunder of hoofbeats on the packed dirt of the main street. Vivian's hands trembled as she gripped the shotgun, memories of her father's death threatening to overwhelm her. She forced them back, focusing instead on Knox's instructions and the promise of his return. Suddenly, there was a crash from the back of the store. Someone was breaking in through the storeroom door. Vivian raised the shotgun, aiming at the doorway that connected to the main shop. A man appeared dirty, wild-eyed, with a bandana pulled down around his neck. He held a revolver in one hand and a canvas bag in the other. "Well, well," he drawled, spotting her. "Looks like the shopkeeper's daughter grew up real pretty." Vivian's blood ran cold. She recognized him, one of the men who had ridden away after her father was shot. "Get out of my store," she commanded, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. He laughed. "Now that ain't hospitable. I'm just here for whatever money you got hidden away." His eyes narrowed. "Lower that shotgun, girl, before you get hurt." "You killed my father," she said, her finger tightening on the trigger. "You're not taking anything else from me." The outlaw's expression hardened. "Your pa should have just handed over the money instead of playing hero." He raised his revolver. "Like father, like daughter, I reckon." Vivian fired just as the back door burst open again. The shotgun's recoil slammed into her shoulder as the outlaw was thrown backward, dropping his gun. Knox appeared behind him, his own revolver drawn. "Vivian," he shouted, taking in the scene with a single glance. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. The outlaw was writhing on the floor, clutching his shoulder where the shotgun pellets had struck him. Knox quickly disarmed the wounded man and tied his hands with a length of rope from the store's inventory. "This is Mitch Dawson, one of Rawlins' men," he told her. "The sheriff and deputies are rounding up the others. Rawlins himself is dead." Relief washed over Vivian, making her knees weak. She set the shotgun aside with shaking hands. "Dead?" Knox nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. "He tried to rob the bank. Mayor Putnam was working late and raised the alarm. When Rawlins fled, he ran straight into the sheriff's barricade, chose to fight rather than surrender." The reality of what had just occurred began to sink in. Vivian looked at the wounded outlaw, then at the shotgun she'd fired. She had shot a man, the same man who had helped murder her father. Justice had been served, yet she felt no triumph, only a hollow exhaustion. Knox seemed to understand. He crossed to her and gently drew her into his arms. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "They can't hurt anyone else now." She leaned into his strength, finally allowing the tears she'd held back for so long to fall. They were tears of grief for her father, tears of relief that the danger had passed, and tears of something else, a release of the solitude and fear she'd carried for months. Knox held her until her tears subsided, then carefully led her to a chair. "Stay here," he said softly. "I need to get the sheriff for Dawson." By dawn, the excitement in Ash Fork had settled into a buzz of relieved conversation. The Rawlins gang, what remained of it, was locked in the town jail awaiting transfer to Prescott for trial. 2 outlaws had been killed in the gunfight, including Rawlins himself. 1 deputy had been wounded, but not seriously. Vivian, exhausted but unable to sleep, sat at her kitchen table as Knox made coffee. He had refused to leave her alone after the incident, sending word to the Hollister ranch that he would be staying in town. "What happens now?" she asked quietly as he set a steaming cup before her. Knox took the chair opposite hers. "Dawson and the others will stand trial. With multiple witnesses, they'll hang for sure." "No, I mean," she hesitated. "What happens with you? Your hunt for Rawlins is over." He studied her face for a long moment. "That depends partly on you, Vivian." Her heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "On me." "I came to Ash Fork seeking vengeance," he said slowly. "I found something else instead, something I never expected." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I found you." Vivian's throat tightened with emotion. "And what does that mean to you?" It means I'm not the same man who rode into town 6 months ago, he answered. That man was empty inside, just going through the motions of living while chasing ghosts. You changed that. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I love you, Vivian. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay in Ash Fork. Build a life here, with you. The declaration, so simply stated yet so profound, left her momentarily speechless. In the silence, doubt flickered across Knox's face. I understand if you need time, he said, beginning to withdraw his hand, or if your feelings aren't the same. I just wanted you to know, Knox, she interrupted, tightening her grip on his hand. I do need time. Not because I don't care for you, I do, deeply, but because this is all happening so fast. A few days ago, I thought I'd spend my life alone running this store. Now everything's changed, he finished for her. I understand, Vivian. I'll give you all the time you need. True to his word, Knox did not press her for an answer in the days that followed. He returned to his work at the Hollister Ranch, but continued to handle her deliveries and visit the store regularly. Their interactions were warm but restrained, both aware of the unresolved question between them. 2 weeks after the shootout, as spring truly took hold across the territory, bringing wildflowers and warmer days, Vivian made her decision. She closed the store early one afternoon and rode out to the Diamondback Ranch, borrowing Mrs. Peterson's gentle mare for the journey. Samuel Hollister himself greeted her when she arrived, his weathered face breaking into a knowing smile when she asked for Knox. He's in the west pasture, Miss Larson, the rancher informed her. Breaking that new stallion we bought last month. Only man on the place with the patience for that devil of a horse. Vivian followed his directions to a fenced corral where a small group of cowboys were gathered, watching as Knox worked with a magnificent black stallion. Man and horse moved in a careful dance, the stallion still wary but gradually responding to Knox's quiet persistence. She watched, transfixed, as Knox spoke to the animal in low, soothing tones, never rushing, never forcing. When the stallion finally allowed him to stroke its neck without flinching, a cheer went up from the watching cowboys. Only then did Knox notice her presence. He handed the stallion's lead rope to another ranch hand and made his way to where she waited by the fence. "Vivian," he said, surprise and pleasure evident in his voice. "Is everything all right at the store?" "Everything's fine," she assured him. "I came because I have something to tell you, something important." Knox's expression grew serious as he held the gate open for her. "Let's walk a bit," he suggested, guiding her away from the curious eyes of his fellow ranch hands. They strolled toward a stand of cottonwoods near a small stream that cut through the Hollister property. Spring had transformed the landscape, bringing green to the previously barren earth. It seemed fitting, Vivian thought, that she had come to give her answer amid this renewal. When they reached the shade of the trees, Knox turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "You've made your decision," he stated rather than asked. Vivian nodded, suddenly nervous despite her certainty. "I have." She took a deep breath. "When my father died, I thought that was the end of happiness for me. I decided that love wasn't worth the pain it inevitably brought. I convinced myself I could live alone, need no one." Knox listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. "But then you came into my store," she continued. "You didn't try to take over or tell me what to do. You offered help without making me feel helpless. You were patient when I was prickly, kind when I was afraid." She smiled softly. "You showed me what patience truly means, not just waiting, but understanding, respecting." She stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. "I love you, Knox Fitzgerald, and yes, I want to build a life with you." Joy transformed his face, erasing years of sorrow in an instant. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that made her laugh with delight. "I promise you won't regret this," he said when he finally set her down, his voice husky with emotion. "I'll spend every day making sure of it." "I'm counting on that," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "But I have one condition." His eyebrows rose. "Name it." "The store stays in my name," she said firmly. "It's my father's legacy and I want to honor that." "I don't mind if you help, in fact. I'd welcome it, but it remains Larson's General Store." Knox's smile was immediate and genuine. "I wouldn't have it any other way. Your independence is one of the things I love most about you, Vivian." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony in the Ash Fork Church. The entire town turned out, even Harold Garrett, though he stood sullenly at the back. Mr. Hollister gave the bride away, and his wife arranged a wedding feast at the ranch afterward. As spring turned to summer, Knox and Vivian settled into a rhythm of shared work and companionship. He continued at the Hollister Ranch 3 days a week, but spent the rest of his time helping at the store, which was thriving under their joint management. They expanded the delivery service to weekly runs and added a catalog order system for items they didn't regularly stock. By fall, there was another change in their lives. Vivian was expecting their first child. As her pregnancy progressed, Knox took on more of the store's physical labor, but always with the understanding that the business decisions remained equally shared. Their son, Richard Thomas Fitzgerald, was born on a snowy January night in 1878. Knox paced outside their bedroom while Mrs. Peterson attended the birth, his face pale with worry until the midwife finally allowed him in to see his wife and newborn son. "He has your eyes," Vivian whispered tiredly as Knox cradled the tiny bundle with awe. "And your determined chin," he replied, gently touching the baby's face. "He'll be as stubborn as his mother, I reckon. And as patient as his father, I hope," she countered with a smile. By the time little Richard, called Ricky by everyone in town, was taking his first steps, Knox and Vivian had purchased the vacant lot next to the store and built a proper home. The store itself had been expanded, with a new section dedicated to ranching supplies that Knox oversaw. On warm evenings, they would sit on their porch watching the sunset, Ricky playing at their feet, and marvel at how much their lives had changed in just 2 years. "Did you ever imagine this?" Vivian asked one such evening, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly where their second child was growing. "When you rode into Ash Fork looking for Rollins, did you ever think you'd end up here?" Knox shook his head, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Never. I thought my life was about endings, not beginnings." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You taught me otherwise." "We taught each other," she corrected gently. "I was so determined to need no one, to prove I could manage alone. You showed me that accepting help, accepting love, isn't weakness." They fell silent, watching as the sky turned from gold to deep purple. Ricky had fallen asleep on his father's lap, his little face peaceful in slumber. "What do you think about Alina if it's a girl?" Vivian asked after a while. "After my mother." "Alina Fitzgerald," Knox tested the name. "It's beautiful, and if it's another boy," Vivian considered. "Samuel, perhaps, after Mr. Hollister. He's been like a father to both of us." Knox nodded, clearly pleased with the suggestion. "Samuel it is, then. Though I have a feeling it's a girl, she'll have your spirit and determination." "And your patience," Vivian added with a smile. "Heaven knows she'll need it with me as her mother." Knox laughed softly. "Our children will have the best of both of us, I think." As darkness settled over Ash Fork, they gathered their sleeping son and went inside, closing the door on the desert night. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, their voices carrying on the clear air. A train whistle sounded from the newly constructed depot at the edge of town, a sign of progress. of the changing West. But within the walls of their home, Knox and Vivian had found something timeless, a love built on patience, respect, and the courage to begin again after loss. The store that had once represented Vivian's solitary determination to survive now stood as a testament to their partnership, to the strength they'd found in each other. Eleanor Grace Fitzgerald was born the following spring, with her mother's honey-blonde hair and her father's whiskey-colored eyes. As Knox had predicted, she proved to be spirited and determined from her first breath. And as Vivian had hoped, she also inherited her father's steady patience. By the time the century turned, Larson's General Store had become Larson and Fitzgerald's Mercantile, the largest and most prosperous business in Ash Fork. Knox and Vivian, now in their late 40s, had raised 3 children. Ricky had been joined by Eleanor, and 4 years later by Samuel. Ricky had his father's way with horses, and had started his own breeding operation on land purchased from the Hollister Ranch. Eleanor, much to the town's initial surprise, had shown a keen mind for business and worked alongside her parents in the store, introducing innovative ideas that kept them ahead of their competition. Young Samuel, at 16, was still finding his way, but showed promise as a writer, keeping detailed journals of life in the changing frontier. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire town gathered to celebrate the couple whose partnership had helped transform Ash Fork from a dusty outpost to a thriving community. The old church where they had married was now a grand stone structure, and the reception was held in the town hall that Knox had helped build as a member of the town council. During the festivities, Samuel Hollister, now white-haired but still straight-backed and strong, raised a toast to the couple. 25 years ago, I hired a quiet cowboy who I thought might not last the season, he began, drawing laughter from the crowd. And across town was a stubborn young woman who everyone said couldn't possibly run a store on her own. He smiled at Knox and Vivian, who sat hand in hand at the head table. Both of them proved everyone wrong, separately and then together. They've shown us all what can be accomplished with determination, integrity, and patience. After the celebration, as they walked home under a canopy of stars much like those that had witnessed their first days together, Knox stopped and turned to his wife. 25 years, he marveled, his face still handsome despite the gray at his temples. Sometimes I can hardly believe it. Vivian squeezed his hand, her heart as full of love for him as it had been on their wedding day. The best 25 years, she agreed. Though I expect the next 25 will be even better. Knox laughed and pulled her close. Always looking forward, aren't you? Never content to rest. I learned that from a patient cowboy, she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. He taught me that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth working toward. And he was right. As they continued home beneath the eternal Arizona sky, Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought them here from loss and loneliness to love and family. She had once believed that happiness was beyond her reach, that love would only bring more pain. Instead, she had found that with the right person beside her, even the hardest challenges could be faced and overcome. Knox had shown her what patience truly meant, not just the ability to wait, but the wisdom to recognize what was worth waiting for. And she had taught him that the end of one chapter could lead to the beginning of a far greater story. Together, they had written that story across the changing landscape of the American West, a testament to the enduring power of love that grows stronger with each passing day.